Alright, hello everyone. So today I'll be discussing the solutions to Codeforces round 745. So this was a division 2 round held yesterday, and to be honest, this was a pretty difficult round. The problems were pretty difficult and it was a bit on the trickier side, which is pretty evident from the fact that around only 6.5 thousand people actually made a submission to problem A, which is very less as compared to a normal Codeforces round. Generally around 14-15,000 people do participate in rounds, but this time a lot of people just saw A and they just gave up, right? So that is the level of problem A only in this problem set. So yeah, the contest was a bit on the trickier side, and I'll be discussing the first three problems because beyond that the difficulty is a bit too high for me as well. So yeah, let's jump to problem A, right? So in this problem we have given, so we have to count the number of permutations of length 2n such that the value of the permutation is at least n. Now let's define the value of a permutation. The value of a permutation is the number of indices I for which p of I is less than p of I plus 1, right? So this is the definition of the value of a permutation, and we need to count the number of permutations of length 2n whose value is at least n. And a permutation is just a combination of integers from 1 to 2n where every integer occurs exactly once, right? Yeah, so that's a permutation and that's the value of a permutation. Let's see how to do this, right? We know the total number of permutations of length 2n of course is 2n factorial. That is standard combinatorics. If you don't know this, it's all right. Just know for a fact that the total number of permutations of length 2n will be 2n factorial, right? Okay, so let's start by analyzing the identity permutation for n is equals to 3. So the identity permutation is going to look something like this: 1 2 3 4 5 6, and its value is going to be 5. Why? Because all the indices from 1 to 5 contribute, right? All the indices from 1 to 5, p of I is less than p of I plus 1, so the value of this is 5, right? So basically the value being 5 means that there are 5 pairs of values, 5 pairs of indices I comma I plus 1. So there are 5 pairs of the form I comma I plus 1 which contribute to the value, right? So basically the first 5 indices contribute to our value, right? So 1 and 2, 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 4 and 5, and 5 and 6. All right, now let's look at the totally reverse of this: 6 5 4 3 2 1, right? So we can see that its value is definitely 0 because there is no index for which the value to the right of it is smaller, value to the right of it is greater. So yeah, there is no pair which actually contributes to the value. Okay, great. So one thing that we realize here is that these two permutations are just the reverse of each other, and any pair which contributes in this permutation does not contribute in this permutation, right? So this 1 comma 2 pair which is contributing in this permutation is not contributing in the reverse of it. Why? Because 2 was to the right of 1 in the first permutation, but in the reversed form 2 will be on the left. So any pair which is contributing in a permutation will not contribute in its reverse, right? So the key is any pair contributing in a permutation will not contribute in the reverse permutation, right? Okay, also another point to note is the sum of value of p plus value of reverse of p is always going to be 2n minus 1, and this is fairly obvious because the number of pairs we have is 2n minus 1, and a particular pair will contribute either in the permutation or in the reverse of it, right? And it will contribute in one of them, that's for sure, and the number of pairs we have is 2n minus 1, so this value is going to be 2n minus 1. So this means the number of, so this means if a permutation has value less than n, then its less than n, yeah, then its reverse will have a value greater than n. And why is that? Because if a permutation has value of x, then its reverse will have a value of 2n minus 1 minus x, right? And if x is less than n, so if x is less than n, then 2n minus 1 minus x will be greater than n. So this basically means that the number of permutations having a value less than n is equal to the number of permutations having value greater than n, right? And we need the number of permutations having values greater than or equals to n. So we know that this number is equal to the number of permutations having values less than n. So final answer is equals to half of the total number of permutations. Well, I hope it is clear why the total answer will be half of the number of permutations. So yeah, finally the answer would be 2n factorial divided by 2, and the code also is fairly obvious. So this is the code here. I am pre-calculating all the factorial values, and finally I am multiplying the factorial of 2n by the modular inverse of 2. This is just one way to do it. If you don't know about modular inverses, don't worry about it. You can also straight away here divide it by 2 to avoid this inverse of 2. Yeah, so this is basically it. You take the factorial of 2n and divide it by 2, and that's the final answer, right? So this was problem A. Again, it was not as trivial as a general problem A. So yeah, if you were not able to solve it, there is really no need to get disheartened if you're a beginner, I would say. Alright, so let's move to the next problem. So yeah, we have problem B now. Problem B was not that difficult, so I would say this was the only well placed problem in the entire problem set. So it was okay for a div 2B problem, right? So yeah, let's see what this problem asks. So we have to create an undirected graph with n nodes and m edges, and the condition to hold is that the diameter of the graph must be strictly less than k minus 1. Now I really don't know why they have put a k minus 1 here when they could have easily put a k here, but anyways, also we can't have self loops and multiple edges in our graph. That's one thing. Now the diameter of the graph, if you don't know about what a graph is, it's all right. I think you can skip this problem. But for the people who know, the diameter of the graph is the maximum distance between any two nodes, and the distance between two nodes is the minimum number of edges on the path on which the endpoints are the two nodes, right? So we have to tell whether it's possible to create such a graph with the given n, m and k values or not, right? So this is the problem. Problem statement is fairly simple to understand. Let's jump to the solution now. Alright, so let's look at a situation where we have a graph. This is problem B. Alright, so now let's look at a situation where we have less than n minus 1 edges, right? So the first case is when m is less than n minus 1. Now we know that a tree has n minus 1 edges, and using less than n minus 1 edges we can never get a connected graph. So the answer is no. Okay, now case 2, when m is greater than nc2, right? Again, we have to avoid multiple edges and self loops. So we can have a maximum of nc2 edges because we can have at most one edge between any two vertices. So again, if the number of edges is greater than nc2, the answer would be no. So these are the two trivial cases to handle first of all, and you can get rid of these two cases. to make your code look a bit clean. Now you're sure that m lies between n minus 1 to nc2, and now let's analyze what is happening. So let me draw a graph to make things more clear. Let's say we have n minus 1 edges exactly, and we draw a graph like this. We take a node and we connect it to all the other nodes, right? So this becomes basically a tree, a rooted tree, where the root is connected to all the other nodes directly by an edge, right? So let's consider a situation like this. Okay, so just by using exactly n minus 1 edges, we have a situation like this. We have a connected graph, so that condition is satisfied. And let's look at the diameter. Let's pick any two nodes which are not the root, and the distance between these two nodes is going to be 2, right? So if we pick these two nodes, then the distance is going to be 1 plus 1, right? So the maximum distance between any two nodes here is 2. So the diameter is 2. Basically, I can say that the diameter of this figure which I have drawn is equals to 2, just by using n minus 1 edges, right? So we have simply used n minus 1 edges and the diameter is as low as 2, right? So now another observation is, if we take more edges, the graph will become more and more connected, right? So that is to say, the distance between any two nodes, like the distance between any two nodes can never increase by adding more edges, right? It can only decrease, right? So distance between any two nodes can never increase, and hence the diameter can never increase. And we already have a graph with diameter 2, so the diameter can either be 2 or 1. So that is the critical observation in this problem. So if we do something like this, we make a rooted tree and connect all the other nodes with the root, then we have a graph of diameter 2. And now if we add more edges to the graph, then the graph will become more and more connected and the diameter can only decrease. I hope it's clear, right? So let's say, so now the question arises, when will the diameter become less than 2, right? So if m is less than nc2, that is, there is at least a pair of edges, at least a pair of nodes which do not contain a direct edge between them, right? If now the next observation is, if m is less than nc2, there is at least one pair of nodes which do not have an edge between them. Now if there is no edge between two nodes, obviously the distance between the two nodes is greater than 1. So the distance between them would be greater than 1. That is a fairly obvious thing to say, and hence we can say that the diameter of the graph will be greater than 1. So I have proved that as long as m is less than nc2, the diameter of the graph will be greater than 1, and I have a graph with the diameter 2 with using just n minus 1 edges. Okay, now let's see what happens if m is equals to nc2, right? If m is equals to nc2, in that case all nodes have an edge between them, so the diameter is equals to 1, right? Because the distance between any two nodes is exactly 1. Why? Because all the nodes are simply connected by edges, right? So the diameter is 1. So basically what is happening to the diameter? We are constructing a graph having a minimum diameter, right? So as long as we have we have at least n minus 1 edges and at most nc2 edges, we are good. And if that condition is satisfied, as long as we have less than nc2 edges, the minimum diameter we can get is 2. Why? Because using at least n minus 1 edges, we are getting a graph having a diameter 2, and adding more edges will only decrease the diameter. So I claim that the diameter will remain 2 until and unless m becomes nc2, and when m will become nc2, the minimum diameter will become 1, and this solves our problem. Finally, we can check if the minimum diameter is strictly less than k minus 1 or not, right? Yeah, so that's the solution to this problem. There is just one other case here, and that is when n is equals to 1. In that case, our diameter will be 0. So that case has to be handled separately. Other than that, this is the full solution. So I hope it is clear. Let's just look at the code here. Alright, so this is the code for this problem. First of all, I check the condition that m is less than n minus 1 or m is greater than n into n minus 2. If that is the case, I simply output no. Now I know that m is at least n minus 1 and it is at most nc2. So I take a variable minimum diameter and I check if m is equals to nc2, then the minimum diameter would be 1, otherwise the minimum diameter would be 2. And this is the corner case which I was talking about, and that is when n is equals to 1. In this case, the minimum diameter would be 0. And finally, I am just checking if the minimum diameter is strictly less than k minus 1 or not. If it is, then I am fine, else I am not fine. And finally, if I am fine, I am outputting yes, else I am outputting no. Right, so yeah, this was problem B. Pretty simple and trivial problem, just casework. If you have a sound knowledge of graphs, you have probably solved it already. Right, so yeah, this was problem B. I hope things were clear with this problem. Now we'll be coming to the most interesting problem that I'll be discussing today, and I'll be giving a lot of time to this problem because it actually took me a lot of time to understand it. So yeah, I hope I can make you guys understand it better, right? So yeah, with problem B done, let's switch to problem C now. Okay, so here we are given a rectangular grid of size n cross m, a standard grid, and each block is either a 1 or a 0. So yeah, that is the case, and we need to find in one operation we can convert a 1 to a 0 or a 0 to a 1. Again, standard stuff here. So in an operation, you take a cell and invert it. If it is holding a 1, you convert it to a 0, and vice versa, right? And finally, you need to tell the minimum number of operations required so that you get a subgrid of size a cross b, where a is greater than equals to 5 and b is greater than equals to 4. That is, the number of rows in your subrectangle have to be greater than equals to 5 and the number of columns have to be greater than equals to 4. And here are a few conditions, right? So these conditions state that all the boundary blocks should be black. Basically, after converting these conditions to a normal language, they mean that all the boundary blocks should be black, first of all, except the corner blocks, right? These 4 are corner blocks, these can be anything, and all the other boundary blocks should be black, that is, they should be 1, and all the inside blocks, they should be white meaning 0, right? So these are the only 3 conditions. All the boundary blocks except the corner blocks are black. The corner blocks can be anything, and all the blocks in the middle should be white, they should be zeros, and the corner blocks can be anything, as I have said. Yeah, so this is the condition, and I need to know the minimum number of operations required so that I get at least one subgrid like this. Okay, so that's the problem. The constraints are not very less, so I can't do a total brute force, but I'll start from a total brute force solution only, and we'll build up further optimizations as we go. Okay, so let's look at this problem now. So we have a grid like this, and right now we are looking at the completely brute force solution, right? So what we do here is we iterate for the rectangle, right? And how can we completely define a rectangle? We can completely define a rectangle if we have 2 corners, right? If we have this corner, so if we have a corner like this and a corner like this, then this completely defines a rectangle for us, which is this rectangle, right? So if we are iterating over all rectangles, we'll need 2 points, the leftmost corner and the rightmost corner, and the total number of points are nm. So if we are iterating over all the rectangles, we will require at least n square m square time, and this is just for iterating over the rectangles. And now we have to calculate some values as well, right? So we have chosen a rectangle, and what we need to do is we need to count all the ones here because everything here has to be 0, right? So the number of ones here have to be the number of operations required to convert it all to 0, right? And we also need to find the number of zeros here, the number of zeros here, the number of zeros here, and the number of zeros here. And that is to convert everything, because here everything needs to be a 1. So any 0 present at the border will have to be converted to a 1, right? So calculating everything is trivial, so we can again do it in linear time, right? So basically in quadratic time I am iterating over all the rectangles, and in linear time I am calculating the value for each rectangle. And that means that my total time complexity for doing this, so firstly I have a brute force solution, and the time complexity is big O of n cube m cube, right? Because O of n square m square time to iterate over a rectangle, and O of nm time to calculate the stuff inside the rectangle, right? Okay, so this is the brute force complexity. Simple optimization would be to use prefix sums, 2D prefix sums, right? If you don't know 2D prefix sums, you don't need to worry. I think I'll be covering them here, right? So using prefix sums, we can actually calculate this stuff inside every rectangle in constant time, and that would bring down a complexity to O of n square m square, right? So using prefix sums, the time complexity can be further lowered to O of n square m square, right? So there's that. Now let's see what prefix sum actually means. We know, I mean, I'm assuming you guys know what a 1D prefix sum is, like calculating a prefix sum inside an array. Okay. So let's see what a prefix sum is. Basically, if I am looking at a particular cell I comma j, let's say I am looking at this cell, then I'll be creating a prefix sum array where essentially prefix sum will be a 2D array. Prefix sum ij will be the sum or sum of all cells in the sub rectangle from 1 comma 1 to I comma j, right? So if I have such a value with me, that is a sum of all the values, sum of all the cells in the rectangle from 1 comma 1 to I comma j, it basically means something like this. So if I am at I comma j, my prefix sum of I comma j will be denoting sum of all the values in this particular rectangle, right? So this is 1 comma 1 and this is I comma j. So prefix sum of I comma j is denoting this value. Okay, now the question arises how to calculate this, right? Firstly, I'll show how to calculate prefix sums, and then I'll be showing how to actually use these prefix sums to bring down this complexity, right? Okay, so let's see, if we move from if we move in a in a bottom up approach, we can simply say that the prefix sum of 1 comma 1 is just 1 if a11 is 1 and 0 otherwise, right? So yeah, we have the prefix sum of 1 comma 1 with us. And similarly, if I am at I comma j, I am assuming that for all I less than equals to my for all I1 less than equals to my I, and for all j1 less than equals to my j, I already have the prefix sum values calculated, right? So it's probably a dynamic programming like fashion, right? That is how I'm calculating the prefix sums. Okay, so let's look at the recursive relation of calculating the prefix sums now. I'll write the relation first and then prove it. So let me write it here. So the relation goes something like this. Prefix sum of ij is equals to prefix sum of I minus 1 j plus prefix sum of I j minus 1 minus prefix sum of I minus 1 j minus 1 plus a of I j, rather grid of I j. I know that the grid contains only zeros and ones, so basically prefix sum of I j here is denoting the actually the number of ones, because the sum will only be the number of ones, right? Okay, great. Now how to prove this relation? So I need the sum from 1 comma 1 to I comma j, right? So let's see what this prefix sum of I minus 1 j denotes. This prefix sum of I minus 1 j denotes the sum from here to here. It denotes the sum of this subrectangle, right? Okay. And the prefix sum of I j comma 1 denotes something like this, the sum of this subrectangle, this one, right? And prefix sum of I minus 1 j minus 1 essentially denotes the sum of this subrectangle. Okay. So if I am taking prefix sum of I minus 1 j and then I am taking prefix sum of I j minus 1, you will notice that I am considering this region 2 times. Okay. So if I subtract from this the prefix sum of I minus 1 j minus 1, I am considering this region once, I am considering this region once, and I am considering this region once. So basically I have considered everything except my ij once, and that is why I add grid ij to the end to get prefix sum of ij, right? So I'll be repeating this. To calculate prefix sum of ij, first I take the sum of this region. Okay. Then I take the sum of this region. And then I subtract the sum of this middle region. Why? Because it was being taken twice. This region is what I subtract, right? This region in the middle. And finally, I have taken everything except grid ij, and that is why I add grid ij. Great. So I hope it's clear how we are calculating the prefix sums. So yeah, I have calculated the prefix sums array in linear time O of nm time. Great. So now that I have the prefix sum array, how do I optimize it? How do I use it to optimize my solution from O of n cube m cube to n square m square? Let's look at that. All right. Okay, great. So we were looking at a rectangle. Let's say we are looking at a rectangle like this. Okay. The rectangle is something like this. All right. And this is the inner part of my rectangle. All right, great. So I need to know the number of ones here in the middle region. Why? Because in the middle region I want only zeros. So the number of ones here will be equal to the number of operations I am doing, right? Okay. Now the number of ones here can be calculated using prefix sums. In a similar fashion, how I am calculating prefix sum of ij, I can use the prefix sums of ij and the prefix sums of okay, so I think I'll have to explain this part as well. So let's see how to calculate the number of ones in a particular rectangle. Right now prefix sum of ij is storing the number of ones in the rectangle starting at 1 comma 1 and ending at I comma j, right? So let's label this cell as I1 j1, I1 j1, and let's say this particular cell is I2 j2, right? Oh, I'm sorry, not this cell. This cell is I2 j2, and I need to know the number of ones in the rectangle starting at I2 j2 and finishing at I1 j1, right? Okay, so let's write the expression for it. So let's see. So the number of rectangles in I2 j2 to I1 j1 is going to be nothing but prefix sum of I1 j1. So this is basically the total number of rectangles from I1 j1 to 1 comma 1, right? So we have the number of rectangles from here to here. We have the number of ones from here to here. Okay, great. And but I only needed the number of ones in this region, in the middle region. So I'll have to subtract two regions, right? One is this region and the other is this region, right? So I need to subtract two regions. uh, Let me use a different color here. One is this region and the other is this region. But again you will realize that this portion which is painted both red and green is being subtracted two times. So I'll just add it towards the end so that it is subtracted only once, right? And this way I can get my number of ones in this particular region which I want, right? Okay, so that is going to be nothing but, so prefix sum of I1 J1, prefix sum of I1 J1, and from that we will be subtracting this region, this red region, and that is going to be prefix sum of I2, and this is J1 minus 1, and from this I will be subtracting this green region which is going to be prefix sum of, this is I2 minus 1 and J1, and this is going to be I1 and J2 minus 1, right? But then I realized that I have subtracted this portion twice, so I'll be adding that. So that is going to be I2 minus 1 and J2 minus 1, right? Yeah, so this way I can calculate the number of ones in any subrectangle, right? So now I'm assuming that you guys have understood how we calculate the number of ones in any particular rectangle in O of 1 time, in constant time, right? So now that we have such a power, we can calculate the number of ones in this middle region, and we can calculate the number of zeros in these border regions. That can be simply done by subtracting the number of ones from the total number of cells, and in this way we can in constant time calculate the answer for any rectangle, right? So yeah, using prefix sums we have optimized our answer from O of n cube m cube to O of n square m square. Now let's again have a look at the constraints. So we can see that both nm are up to 400. So an O of n square m square solution is definitely going to TLE here, right? So we need to find a way to further optimize it, right? So yeah, when neither prefix sums or anything else can help you, you always think of something like dynamic programming, right? So yeah, that is something which we are going to make use of. So instead of iterating over both the corners, now I'm going to do something extra and something special here, right? Let's see what we're going to do now. Let's clear this up a little bit. Okay, let's move to the next page. All right, so instead of now fixing the left and right ends, instead of now fixing the left and right corners which I did previously, I'm going to fix the left and right columns, right? So let's say I fix the left column as this and the right column as this, right? Okay, remember the difference between the two columns have to be at least 4, because that's the requirement of the problem, nothing fancy here. Okay, so I have fixed my two columns, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate. So I'm going to iterate over all the pairs that I can take. There will be O of m square pairs, right? Since there are m columns and I'm picking two columns, so there will be O of m square pairs like this. And right now I'm at this particular pair, and since I'm iterating over all the pairs, I can actually just forget about the entire array and just look at this segment between these two pairs, between these two columns, right? So I'll just focus on this part of my matrix, and since I'm iterating, my iteration will take care of all the parts. But currently I'm focusing on only this part, right? So the third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to iterate on my base row, right? So whichever subrectangle I am at, it will contain a bottommost row, right? So right now let me fix the row as this, right? Okay, so I have a row, and I'll be doing, as I said, I'll be doing a DP here. Okay, well and good. So for a fixed L and R, I will make a DP array. Okay, now let's say that this row is I. This is the row which we are currently at, right? Let's say this row is I. Okay, so let's see what the DP array will denote. So DP of I denotes the minimum cost subrectangle satisfying all conditions of the problem and having the bottommost row as I, right? So basically dp of I denotes the rectangle having, so basically dp of I is the minimum cost of a subrectangle which essentially satisfies all these conditions given in the problem, right? So it has a width of at least 5, and by definition, since we are choosing L and R to be at least distance 4 apart, this condition B is greater than 4 is already satisfied, and we'll be choosing the rectangles in such a way that the width is at least 5 and all these conditions will also be satisfied, right? So dp of I is the minimum cost subrectangle. The only extra condition is that for dp of I, the base of the rectangle should be the ith row. Okay, great. So now this means that in O of m square we are iterating over our L and R, and in O of n, if we can calculate this DP array, then we'll be done with this problem in O of nm square, right? So that is the goal here. Okay. So let's see. So basically dp of I is the minimum cost of a subrectangle having width at least 5 and also satisfying the other conditions in the problem. With base row I, right? So I hope you guys have understood what dp of I actually means. Now the transitioning part. The transitions are not that trivial, to say the least. The transitions are a bit complex here, but I'll try my best to explain it, right? So let's say we are in the ith row and we want to transition to the I plus 1th row. Okay, right? So from this row we need to go to this row. This is I plus 1, right? From the ith row we are transitioning to I plus 1th row. So now we need to calculate the minimum cost of a subrectangle having its base row as the I plus 1th row and all the other conditions remain the same. The width should be at least 5, right? Okay, so basically what we want is that all the elements here should be black and all the elements here above should be white, and we don't know the upper limit, right? The upper limit can be anything, but all we know is that every element here should be white, that is 0, and every element here should be black and every element here should be black. That is what we want from dp of I. Okay, all right. So let's look at dp of I and calculate dp of I plus 1 using that. So in dp of I, we wanted all the elements in this row to be black and everything else remains the same, right? The only difference between dp of I and dp of I plus 1 is that in dp of I plus 1 we want this bottom row to be black, and in dp of I we want this bottom row to be black. Okay, so that's one thing. And the other difference is that in dp of I we are considering all the rectangles having width at least 5 and ending at the row I, and in dp of I plus 1 we are considering all the rectangles having width at least 5 and having their bottom row as I plus 1, right? So the rectangles having their width at least 5 and ending at the row I plus 1, can be of two types. They are the rectangles having width strictly greater than 5, and a single rectangle having width exactly 5, right? So okay, so if a rectangle has a width greater than 5 and its base is I plus 1, that rectangle was already being considered in dp of I, because if its width is 6 and above, and the base is I, then its width becomes 5 and above, right? So that rectangle was already being considered in dp of I, and the only rectangle which was not considered in dp of I was a single rectangle having a width of 5 and having an endpoint at I plus 1. Okay, so that's one thing. But you might argue that the structure of the rectangle having a width, having a bottommost row as I, and the structure of rectangle having the bottom row of I plus 1 are different, right? Because in dp of I we considered the rectangles to have their bottom row I, so their ith row has to contain all the cells as black other than the corner cells, and in dp of I plus 1 all the cells in the I plus 1th row have to be black other than the corners, right? But that's not a problem for us. We can simply subtract the number of operations which it took to make all these cells black, and just add the number of operations which will take to convert all these cells white, right? Because when we are transitioning from I to I plus 1, the bottommost row is I plus 1, so we want all these cells to be white, right? That's the thing here, right? So basically we have two cases. This is a bit complex and it is difficult to understand, and also this is definitely not a 1700 problem. For those who are not able to solve it, I would rate it at least a 1900 or 2000. So I'll advise you not to get disheartened by looking at the rating which the Codeforces system has given to it, right? Okay, so dp of I will be either of the two things. So the first is the cost of converting the rectangle having width exactly 5 and ending at ith row, and the cost, so it will be minimum of the two things, not either. So the cost of converting a rectangle of width strictly greater than 5 and ending at ith row. Now this can be calculated with the help of dp I minus 1. Now how to calculate case 2 using dp of I minus 1, right? So the thing is, in dp of I minus 1, let's say this is I minus 1 and this is I, right? So the thing is, the only difference in the structure is that in dp of I minus 1 I am considering the last row as the I minus 1th row. So I essentially want all these blocks to be white, to be black, and when I'm going to dp of I want all these blocks and these two corner blocks to be white, right? No, instead of black, I want all these middle blocks to be white and also these corner blocks to be white, and all the blocks in the middle in this last row have to be black. That's the only difference, right? So what I can do is if I add to dp of I minus 1 the cost of converting everything in the last row, in the I minus 1th row, to 0, and subtract the cost of converting the So basically I am adding the cost of converting everything in this row to white, and subtracting the cost of converting the I minus 1th row, barring the corner 2 cells black. Then I have converted the I minus 1th row to all white, that is zeros, right? And now I can simply use dp of I minus 1, right? Okay, so yeah, this was my solution. I basically modified dp of I minus 1 in such a way that I can use it, and now I have two choices: either to take this rectangle having a width exactly 5, or to take the rectangle having width greater than 5, which can be calculated using dp of I minus 1. So if it is still not clear to you, it is something similar to calculating the maximum subarray sum, right? What we do there is we take a dp array, and dp of I is either dp of I minus 1 plus a of I, or it is just a of I, right? And we are doing something similar here. We are adding to dp of I minus 1, to modify dp of I minus 1, the cost of converting the ith row to all black, or we are only taking the rectangle of width exactly 5 and whose bottommost row is I. So these are the two cases which we are taking. I know it was a bit difficult to understand, but I recommend you to watch this video again and again to get a more clear idea. And we'll be looking at the code to make it even more clear. So let's look at the code now. Right, so this is the code here. Firstly, I am taking the input as string and converting it into a vector, again because I am more comfortable with vectors. Then I am calculating the prefix sums. That's the stuff which I told in the video. And yeah, so let's see what these two functions are, the 2 0 and the 2 1 function. So the 2 0 functions takes two cells as arguments, and it basically outputs the total number of operations which we need to convert everything in this particular subrectangle to 0. And this 2 1 functions similarly returns the total number of operations which we need to do to convert everything in this subrectangle to a 1. Right, so with that in mind, we do as what I have told. We first iterate for L and then we iterate for R. So that's done. And now we are iterating for the row, right? So this is the bottommost row which we are iterating for. Instead of taking a DP array, I can only take a variable, as in we do in Cadane's algorithm. We can implement Cadane's algorithm of maximum subarray sum using a single variable instead of a DP array, and that is what I am doing here. So yeah, there is that. I am iterating for my bottommost row. So this previous minimum is denoting dp of I minus 1, and this current minimum will be dp of I. Okay. So now firstly I'll calculate the cost of converting the last row to the required condition, right? So what I want in the last row is everything except the two corner cells to be ones. So I will add the cost of doing that. This is just that, this line. So this line is calculating the cost of converting the last row excluding the corner cells to all ones. With that done, now I am calculating the cost of converting the previous 4 rows to all whites, and these 3 lines do that. These 3 lines are converting the previous 4 rows to all zeros. Basically the previous 3 rows should be 0, and the 4th row above it should be black, also excluding the corners, and that is why it is taking me 3 lines of code to do this. These first 2 lines, this middle line converts all the, so yeah, this last line is converting everything in the middle to 0, and these top 2 lines are converting the first and the last row to ones. So there's that. So yeah, so the last row cost plus the previous 4 cost will give me the cost of one subrectangle having width exactly 5 and ending at the ith row. So that's one thing which I want. So this is that so this is that previous 4 cost plus last row cost, right? So this is basically the cost of subrectangle having width exactly 5 and ending at the ith row. And now we want now we'll modify our dp of I minus 1, right? So how are we doing that? I'll show you in a minute. First of all, the current minimum, which is dp of I, can be calculated as previous minimum plus last row cost, or the previous 4 cost plus last row cost. So that is done. And now we'll modify dp of I minus 1 as I told you, right? So in DP of I minus 1, the last row is considered to be all black except the first and the last cells. So firstly, I'll subtract the cost to convert everything to all black, and this is the line which is doing that. This is the line, and finally I want everything to be white there, so I'm converting all the middle cells to white, and uh, I also want the left and the right cells to be black because they are the boundary cells. So this is the cost of doing that. So this is how I modify the previous minimum so that we can directly use the previous minimum here and add the last row cost here. Yeah, so doing that every time and taking the minimum will give us the answer. And I know it was a really difficult problem to explain, but if you analyze my code again and again, and if you watch this video again and again, I'm sure you'll get to know, and you'll things will be more clear with understanding of this problem, right? Yeah, so this was it, and you can check out this code. I have submitted this code for problem C, so you can go to my profile also and check this code out as many times as you want. Yeah, so I hope I tried my best to understand, to make you guys understand, and that's it, I guess, for today, this video. I'll only be covering the first 3 problems. So yeah, thank you guys for watching, and yeah, bye bye.